A Love Letter in English, The Power of Words. In this episode, we explore the emotional and poetic side of English through a heartfelt love letter. Discover how powerful words can express deep feelings and learn romantic vocabulary, tone, and expressions that bring language to life. She sat quietly by the window, watching the rain slide down the glass like tears unspoken. Outside, the city moved as always, unaware of the quiet ache growing in her chest. She reached for her pen, not the cheap plastic one she used for shopping lists or quick notes, but the fountain pen he once gifted her on her birthday. It was black and elegant, like his coat the first night they met. She opened a blank sheet of cream-colored paper, the kind reserved for things that mattered. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of emotion pressing behind each word she was about to write. She took a deep breath, letting the silence of the room settle around her, and began. My dearest, my always. There are 1,000 ways I could begin this letter, and not one would be enough. Language, for all its beauty, fails when I try to pour everything I feel into words. But let me try anyway, because silence has its own way of hurting, and you deserve more than the quiet I've given you. The ink flowed smoothly, as if it too had waited for this moment. Each word carried a memory. The night they first laughed together at the bookstore. The way he pronounced her name like it was a secret. The way his eyes softened when she spoke about her dreams. Love, I've realized, is not in the loud declarations or the grand gestures. It lives in the quiet acts, in making your tea just right, in waiting up when you're late, in holding your hand under the table when the world gets too loud. These things, these small, unnoticed moments, are where my heart lives. She paused, pressing the tip of the pen lightly against the paper. Outside, the rain continued to whisper its song. She remembered his voice, deep and calm, telling her stories about faraway places, making her believe in things bigger than herself. I still remember how you looked at me that first morning, surprised, sleepy, and smiling like I was the sunrise. I didn't know then what I know now, that I would carry that smile with me into every version of the future I imagined. Even now, when we are apart, it lives with me. Her eyes misted, but she didn't wipe the tears. They were a part of the letter, too. Silent punctuation for the sentences that spoke more to the heart than to the mind. I want you to know I still believe in us. Not because love is easy, it never was, and maybe it never will be, but because love like this doesn't happen twice in one life. Because when I think of all the places I could be, I still want to be in the one where you are. She wrote slower now, choosing her words with the care one gives to fragile things. Her handwriting, usually quick and casual, was delicate and exact. This letter wasn't just for him. It was for her, too. A reminder of the girl who learned to speak with honesty and courage. You always told me that English was a strange language, but beautiful, like us. That sometimes the right words are not the longest ones, but the most honest. So here are mine. I love you. Not in a way that expects or demands, but in the quiet, steady way rivers reach the sea. Inevitably, patiently, faithfully. The letter went on, a tapestry of memories, metaphors, and meaning. She compared his presence to warmth after winter, to sunlight on tired skin, to the feeling of being understood without explanation. She wrote about fears, too. About not being enough. About time stealing away what they had. About mistakes that couldn't be undone. But also about forgiveness. And how love sometimes means choosing again and again, even after pain. I know we've made mistakes. I know I have. But even in our worst moments, I never stop seeing you, the real you. And I hope, in your quiet moments, you still see me too. She smiled faintly, hearing the echo of his laugh in the quiet. That laugh had once made her believe the world wasn't such a lonely place. It still did. I don't know where you are right now, whether you're thinking of me or if you've moved on. But wherever you are, I hope this letter reaches the part of you that remembers. With a final breath, she ended the letter with the gentlest of closings. With all that I am, and all that I hope to be, yours. She folded the letter slowly, pressing it flat with her palms like a promise. Then she placed it in an envelope and sealed it, though she didn't know yet if she would send it. Maybe the act of writing was enough. A way to give shape to feelings that had lived too long without form. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky held a softness now, the kind that comes just before sunset. She sat back, hands still on the envelope, and let herself feel the fullness of everything she had said, and everything she hadn't. She didn't need an answer. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because sometimes, the most powerful words are the ones we finally say to ourselves. The letter lay on the table like a secret waiting to be discovered. She stared at it for a long moment, as if it might speak back to her, as if its quiet presence might somehow offer closure or courage. The room felt different now, not emptier, but more honest. As though her truth had filled the corners, made space for peace to return. Later that night, unable to sleep, she found herself listening to recordings of old English love poems. The voices, some ancient, some modern, floated through her headphones like whispers from another time. She thought about how every generation had tried to capture love in words, how Shakespeare wrote sonnets, how Jane Austen painted love in restraint, how songwriters cried their longing into lyrics that traveled oceans. English, she thought, was such a forgiving language. It let you be raw, poetic, silly, or precise, all in one letter if needed. That's why she had written to him in English, even though both of them shared another native tongue. English gave her just enough distance to be honest. It gave her courage, too. The way a mask can let you be more yourself than your bare face ever could. She began to read other people's love letters, too. Historical ones, famous ones, anonymous ones found online. Some were passionate, burning with desire. Others were soft and sorrowful, heavy with regret. One thing was constant. Every letter was a mirror to the soul that wrote it. Every letter was a map through the emotional labyrinth of being human. One in particular stayed with her. It was written by a soldier during World War II to his wife back home. It said, "If this letter finds you, it means I am alive. And if I am alive, it means my love for you is stronger than war." She felt the tears return, uninvited but welcome. How powerful words were, fragile and fierce at once. How much of history, of love, of pain and promise had been carried by sentences written by trembling hands. The next morning, She sat in a cafe with her notebook again. She wasn't writing another letter, not yet. Instead, she began jotting down fragments, thoughts, emotions, words she had once heard from him that still echoed. Words she wished she had said when there was time. Words she might never say aloud, but needed to write to make peace with them. One line stood alone at the top of the page. Love never disappears. It changes shape. That was the truth, wasn't it? The love they shared hadn't vanished. It had evolved, from passion to memory, from daily presence to silent prayer, from hand-holding to letter-writing. And now, it lived in her understanding of herself. How deeply she could feel. How boldly she could express. She thought about how learning English had once been just a skill, a way to pass exams, get jobs, travel the world. But now, it had become a way of healing, a way to process grief, celebrate beauty, and communicate what her own language sometimes couldn't carry. Through English, she had found new metaphors for her emotions, new phrases for her fears, new idioms for her hopes. And that made her think of all the others out there, learning English not just to pass tests, but to write their own stories. People who had letters unsent, apologies unspoken, dreams unwritten. Maybe language wasn't just about fluency. Maybe it was about finding the words that made you whole. She looked around the cafe. There were students reading silently, a couple whispering over shared coffee, a woman writing a postcard. Everyone, in their own way, was using language to connect. And perhaps that was the most human thing of all. The need to be understood, to be heard, to say, I'm here, and I feel this. She smiled to herself, remembering how nervous she had once been speaking English aloud. How she used to fear making mistakes, being misunderstood, sounding less intelligent. But love had changed that. When you need to say something real, perfection becomes irrelevant. And he had always listened, even when her grammar faltered or her accent thickened. He had listened with his heart. That thought gave her comfort. It made her realize the letter she had written wasn't just about him. It was about her growth, her journey, her discovery that words, especially in a second language, could become bridges instead of barriers. She took another sip of coffee and began a new entry in her notebook. This time, it wasn't a letter. It was a list of English phrases that had shaped her understanding of love. She wrote, to fall for someone, to hold someone close, to grow apart, to keep someone in your heart, to let go with grace. Each phrase carried a world within it, a nuance of human connection. And she realized something else. Her letter wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of her new relationship with language, with love, and with herself. She packed her notebook and walked home under the early spring sun, feeling lighter. That evening, she typed her letter. Not to send it, but to save it. A file called Love in English. She wanted it to be there, not just on paper, but on the device she used daily, as a quiet reminder that her voice mattered, her feelings had form, and her English had purpose. The page glowed softly with the words she had written, and for the first time in weeks, she slept soundly, dreaming not of the past, but of all the letters she had yet to write, to herself, to life, to the world. When she opened her laptop the next day, the first thing she saw was the file. Love in English. The title alone gave her a small sense of pride. It wasn't just a document anymore. It had become a container for something deeply human. Emotion, memory, growth, and learning. And as she scrolled through her own words, something occurred to her. This wasn't simply a letter. It was her English voice coming to life. In the months before, she had written English for school assignments, job applications, travel bookings, all functional uses. But this was the first time she'd written English from the heart, unfiltered and emotionally raw. It felt different, almost like the difference between speaking and truly saying something. She began to understand that fluency was not about speed or accent, but about authenticity, the ability to be vulnerable in another language. She remembered how hard it was in the beginning. The grammar drills, the awkward conversations, the silent moments in group discussions where she'd nod instead of speak. But now, here she was, writing freely, not flawlessly, but truthfully. And that made her feel something extraordinary. Pride. That night, she found herself watching English films again, not for entertainment, but to listen more carefully to how love was expressed in dialogue. In one scene, a character whispered, "You make me want to be a better man." She paused the movie and wrote it down. That phrase struck her. It was simple, but it held a universe inside. She began a new page titled, "Phrases That Change Me," and started collecting them like treasures. I see you. You matter. Even silence between us feels safe. I miss the sound of your thoughts. With every phrase, her emotional vocabulary expanded. And that was a powerful realization. That language learning wasn't only about verbs and tenses. It was about learning how to feel, how to express, how to connect across invisible bridges. English was becoming her second skin, not replacing her native tongue, but layering it with nuance. She remembered a time when she had said, "I love you," in her own language, and how different it had felt when she tried it in English. I love you. 3 words, direct and exposed. It took courage to say them, especially for someone learning the language. But perhaps that's what made them even more real. She began writing a series of mini letters to people she had never sent words to. One to her younger self, forgiving the fears and mistakes. One to her future partner, promising truth and tenderness. One to her lost friend, explaining the silence. And one, surprisingly, to her English teacher from years ago. Dear Miss Evans, you once told me, one day, English won't feel like a foreign language to you. It will just feel like your voice. I didn't believe you then, but now, I think you were right. I wrote a love letter in English this week. Not because I had to, but because I could. Thank you. That letter made her cry in a different way. Not from heartbreak, but from healing. Outside, the world was changing seasons again. Spring was turning into summer, and she realized that, in her own life, a new season had begun too. A season of using language to rebuild, to reflect, to reimagine. She thought of all the people who struggle to express emotions. Not because they don't feel deeply, but because the words don't come easily. English for them might be like a locked drawer, but once opened, it could reveal letters they didn't know they had written in their hearts. She opened a blank page and began writing a piece called Why I Write in English. It began like this. Because some feelings don't fit in my first language. Because sometimes distance makes truth easier. Because English taught me not only how to speak, but how to say. She didn't plan to publish it or share it widely, but the act of writing itself was empowering. It reminded her that voice isn't only sound, it's presence. And her presence, in English, had grown stronger. Later that week, a friend asked her why she still practiced English so much. "Aren't you fluent by now?" they asked. She smiled and said, "Fluency isn't the finish line. It's a way of living." She explained how English had become her mirror, her sanctuary, her bridge to understanding herself and others. That evening, she recorded herself reading her original letter aloud, just for herself. Her voice trembled in parts, but the words felt honest. She noticed how naturally her tone shifted between softness and strength. She realized that in speaking the letter, she was reclaiming it. It was no longer about loss. It was about growth. She thought about creating a podcast, something quiet, intimate, a space where others learning English could hear letters like hers. Not grammar lessons, but emotional journeys. Letters in English, she imagined calling it. Each episode a different theme. Love, regret, courage, hope. Stories from learners around the world. Stories that proved how language could heal. The idea lit something inside her. That night, before bed, she wrote one more entry. Language doesn't divide us. It reveals the ways we are the same. As she closed her notebook and turned off the light, she knew something had shifted forever. English was no longer her second language. It had become her second heart. The next morning, she woke up with a strange kind of peace in her chest, the kind of calm that comes when something finds its rightful place. She sat by her window, coffee in hand, and reread the letter one more time. This time, not to edit, not to judge, not to practice, but simply to feel. Every sentence, every pause, every word echoed differently now. They no longer felt like someone else's language. They felt like hers. She opened her journal and began listing the things she had learned, not just about English, but about herself. The list grew fast. I learned that clarity comes not from big words, but honest ones. I learned that emotions translate better through intention than vocabulary. I learned that fluency is not being mistake-free. It's being fear-free. That last one stayed with her. For years, she had been afraid to speak. Not just in English, but in any situation where vulnerability was required. But writing this letter had cracked something open. It taught her that mistakes were not failures. They were signs of bravery. And that bravery had begun to affect other areas of her life. She started speaking up more at work, even when her English wasn't perfect. She dared to start conversations with strangers in cafes, on trains, and even once on a rainy street in Paris when a tourist asked for directions. For the first time, she felt like her voice mattered, like it was enough. The letter itself, she realized, didn't need a reply. It had already served its purpose. It had transformed her from someone who learns English to someone who lives in English. That shift, though invisible, was profound. It wasn't just about being understood anymore. It was about being fully seen. A week later, she walked into a bookstore and bought a book of English poetry, something she had never dared to do before. She didn't understand every word, but she understood the rhythm, the emotion, the breath, between the lines. She underlined phrases that moved her and wrote comments in the margins. It became a conversation between her and the poet, between her and the language. Then, something unexpected happened. A friend asked her to write a speech, in English, for their wedding. "You have a way with words," they said. She hesitated at first, but then she thought back to her letter. If she could write about love in her own voice, surely she could write for someone else's love too. She wrote about promises, about the quiet strength of companionship, about how real love is not always loud but always present. And when she read it aloud at the wedding, her voice didn't shake. People clapped, some cried. One woman came up to her afterward and said, "Your words felt like music." She smiled. That's when she knew. Her English wasn't just a skill. It was a gift. She began mentoring younger students who were learning English. She told them her story, shared the letter, and explained how writing helped her grow in ways grammar books never could. Don't be afraid to feel in English, she told them. Your accent is not a weakness. Your words matter. Let them find their way out. She started a blog called Letters in Translation, where people from all over the world submitted letters they had written in English, to loved ones, to strangers, to their future selves. Some letters were full of mistakes, but all of them were full of truth. The blog grew quickly. Readers didn't come for perfection. They came for connection. She began hosting workshops on emotional writing in English, helping learners tap into personal experiences to make their language learning meaningful. She encouraged journaling, storytelling, voice recordings. The more honest you are, she said, the more fluent you become. Years later, she looked back at the first draft of her love letter. It was still in a folder called English Growth. She didn't edit it anymore. It was beautiful in its original form, like a photograph of who she used to be. And, though she no longer needed to send it, she knew it had already reached its destination. Herself. One afternoon, while sitting in a park, she watched two children speak in English as they chased butterflies. They were laughing, mispronouncing words, mixing sentences, but they didn't care. They were using the language to connect, to play, to exist. And she thought, maybe that's the ultimate fluency, the freedom to be imperfect and still be understood. That night, she added one last line to her journal. English didn't just teach me how to speak, it taught me how to feel. Then she closed the book and whispered something into the quiet room. Thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to the language itself. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt journey in English. Let this story remind you that your voice, in any language, has power. Keep practicing. Keep feeling, and most importantly, keep writing your own story in English. See you in the next episode.